That's a predicate, if you will, to ultimately someone who stands the potential of doing that behavior again and being recontacted and arrested for the Class A misdemeanor. Class A misdemeanor is an offense that oftentimes comes with handcuffing, right, and transportation down to jail and introduction into the system. We looked at 3 years worth of data, and what we found essentially is a high RRI rate, high relative rate index in this crime category. What I mean by that is, you'll remember, visualize that 4.2 arrest RRI rate that we talked about earlier across the system. So that's across the system. What we chose to do is, where do we find some of the most trouble? Higher RRI rates than in other areas. This is one. If we were to, there were two ways to look at this data point. If we were to look at the general population, the RRI rate as it relates to fare jumping arrests for IPTs was actually closer to 8 to 1. TriMet had done a survey, who rides on TriMet, and they had a demographic-based breakdown of who were riders on TriMet. When they did a study as it relates to the population that rides TriMet, still found this troubling high RRI rate, the answer being 5.02 to 1 as it relates to African Americans as contrasted with Caucasians. So that's an area where we want to get to work. We see a high RRI rate. It doesn't seem fair. It also seems relative to disproportionate to the conduct. And here's what I mean by that. The notion is fare evading translating ultimately into a Class A misdemeanor. And so we both looked at the fundamental fairness of this disproportionality, but we also looked at the fairness, the equity, and the proportionality as it relates to action by government for individuals without fare, right? We're really talking about a few dollars riding on TriMet. That matters, but it didn't seem out of line, seemed out of balance. And so as a result of that, what are we working on to address that problem? Remember, these are upstream. We want to get in front of the arrest scenario. So we worked with TriMet and the TriMet police and the TriMet organization, but we also reached out to the Tri-County prosecutors around the region. So Washington County, Clackamas County, and jointly here about 2 months ago, we adopted a Tri-County policy that essentially, in almost completely discontinued the practice of arresting people for fare evasion behavior. I don't want to over-exaggerate. There is a small category that still are exposed to that arrest. But by way of numbers, let me give you some numbers so you can kind of get a sense of what we're talking about. And that'll be that next screen. So what we looked at in those 3 years, rough numbers, you can read them for yourself, but I'm gonna round them. Rough numbers, about 500 to 600 cases per year get submitted to my office for prosecution review. How do they break down? Two big categories. One is behavioral, that's what the chief was summarizing. Another category is the fare evaders, right? Two big categories. The fare evaders are about 400 of the 500, if you will, as you can see. And so actually closer to 500 when you look literally at the numbers. So that's an area where, I'm going to round it, over the 3-year period of time, about 500 individuals are coming into the criminal justice system relative to fare evading, and of those 500, a disproportionate number from the communities of color, most specifically the African American community. So what are we going to do about it? And the answer is, we're not going to do that anymore. We're discontinuing that practice of fare evading arrest, apprehension, bringing into the criminal justice system and lodging for all demographics as it relates to the fare evading, but for a very, very small handful that are significant repeat offenders, chronic offenders. Instead, we work with TriMet to encourage them to move in a different direction with respect to administrative-based sanctions and things like that, and take the criminal justice system out of enforcing that crime category. So, what else? How does that impact your jail, Sheriff?
You know, I think it'd be interesting if you could explain a little bit about benchmarking. you talked about, TriMet did a survey and their RRI index was different from the MacArthur index. And that really goes to who's at risk. And I think that is sometimes driven by victimization rates as well as policy decisions that Chief Marshman talked about. And understanding how MacArthur did their benchmarking versus how TriMet maybe in their study did.
And so there are different decision points, as been touched on. You know, it's a fair conversation for society to both look at the general population as it relates to RRI rates, and then in some certain categories, it's, well, is it more appropriate to look at who writes TriMet, for example, just a universal writes TriMet. You know, so there's just there are different benchmarks and different kind of ways of looking at the same thing. We've attempted to describe both to you. Simply put, both reflect need for action. Both reflect a RRI rate, a disproportionality that called for action. And so this table, together with the other district attorneys in the community on that issue, we've taken some action. So let's move on to the LEAD program, because that's another, as it relates to arrest, remember, because that's a focal point for us. Let's bring down, let's look at the data, let's look at the statistics, let's look at policy, and let's see what we can do next to address disproportionality at that front end, because that's where we see the highest disproportionality. Somebody here, keep track of the math in a way. 500 individuals, we're going to talk about another group, another 500 here in a second. Loosely keep track of math, we'll see who in the last 12 months is going to have, what's the number of people that are going to have a different experience in the criminal justice system as it relates to 12 months worth of work. So 500 so far. So LEAD program. I'll kick it over to the sheriff again because the sheriff and I took a trip. I don't want to give too much background because I want to give it over here to the sheriff, but we took a trip up to Seattle together with some other folks to learn about a program. Sheriff, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I will say in Multnomah County and in the city of Portland, we've been doing a lot of really good work, innovative practices around trying to get people whose criminal behavior is driven by addiction out of the criminal justice system into treatment and into housing. So for many years, we've had the service coordination team model, working with people who have been identified as having addiction issues, and typically they're engaged in low-level criminal activity where they're stealing to support their addiction. And we've been trying to divert them into treatment and housing while still holding them accountable for breaking that cycle of criminal behavior. In Seattle, they took it a step further, and they started a law enforcement assisted diversion program. So for first-time drug offenders, people that officers were coming into contact in I think it was the Belltown neighborhood in downtown Seattle, where there was a lot of street-level drug sales going on, similar to what we might have in downtown Portland. They took that small geographic area and said, let's take those first-time drug offenders that we think, our police officers think can be diverted to case management, get them into treatment programs or supportive care, and divert them completely away from jail and the criminal justice system. In Seattle, in that small geographic area, when they did that, they saw a 58% reduction in recidivism, or drop in recidivism over a cohort that saw traditional treatment, where you would get arrested, go to jail, maybe get put on supervision. So Seattle kind of worked the bugs out, if you will, for us. And District Attorney Rod Underhill and I and a group of other law enforcement leaders in Multnomah County traveled up there to look at their program. We met with the treatment providers, the police officers. They all said this program works. It helps keep people out of the criminal justice system, treat their addiction in a much more humane manner. So we said, why not? This makes sense for us to emulate here in Portland. So Rod has been spearheading our efforts here. The chair, Deborah Kafori, has put $800,000 towards case managers, paying for someone to help. The police officers can refer that person to help break that cycle of addiction and find them more treatment and housing resources.
So let me kind of revisit, I won't revisit the problem, I think the sheriff's done a good job of addressing and giving us an idea of what's the problem, because that's kind of how we write this up. What's the problem? How are we going to address it? So this is another crime category, to use that phrase, this is another crime category where we see high disproportionality, higher than the 4.2. So this is another area that we, dive into, needs work done. We also know, as we learn more about addiction and related issues and experience on the part of the people up here, we need to take a step back. Law enforcement needs to take a step back and make room for services, programs, and the medical emphasis on individuals suffering from abuse and addictive-related issues. We want to make room for that, and there's no better room than we've been able to make so far than I think we're about the 5th jurisdiction in the country to move into a harm reduction model as it relates to possession of user amounts of controlled substances. LEAD is that program. So it's been outlined, as you heard from the sheriff, tried, tested, true it looks like. We ought to realize the same positive results. We're extremely optimistic. Opening day was yesterday, was our first day of the program being opened. So how are we going to address the problem? I think I touched on that. We're going to assign case managers. We're at the point where Chief Marshman's law enforcement officers, because the pilot project is in the downtown core area of Portland. When Chief Marshman's law enforcement officers contact someone who is possessing a felony right now on the books, a felony amount of controlled substance, we're going to conduct that criminal investigation like has occurred in the past. A very important difference is going to occur as it relates to this program. Rather than take the individual and book them into jail for the felony charge of PCS heroin or cocaine or methamphetamine, at that juncture, that individual will be offered an opportunity to, instead of going to jail, entering further into the system and all those collateral consequences that come with that, they'll be offered an opportunity to have a case manager be called and either physically come to their location or meet them somewhere. That case manager is going to, works for Central City Concern, we've contracted with them. They're going to work with that individual and meet that person where they are. And that's an important concept. We've been, in my background with respect to being a prosecutor, we have numerous court-involved treatment programs. Court-involved treatment programs, by and large, insist on abstinence for success. And that's been a lot of the psychology over the years, that if you're not abstaining from the use of a controlled substance or alcohol or such, then you're failing, right? You're not doing well. This is a harm reduction model. This is a model that is going to, instead of insisting on abstinence, it's going to desire steps forward. Harm reduction to both yourself, your loved ones, because drug addiction, those individuals impacted by drug abuse or addiction are impacting themselves, but everybody nowadays, really, I think, has had drug abuse and addiction issues touch their lives in some way, shape, or form. So all of you, loved ones, get impacted by someone special to you that's abusing or addicted to drugs, and the community gets impacted as well. But we want to work on reducing that harm. Some people, it's going to take months, maybe years, and we're going to be patient and work with them. We're not going to insist on the absence. That's the genesis of the program, or the nuts and bolts of it.
Sorry, before you continue, I was hoping to hear a bit about the case managers from Chief Marshman.
Yeah.
Sure, thank you, because I was going to try to interject there. So on the face of it, the $800,000, well, one, it is a lot of money, but it might sound up front like a lot of money. My assertion is if we arrest these folks, put them in jail, I don't think the jail is a proper place to get drug addiction services.
We demand justice for honest days.
Excuse me, at this time, we would like to, we are on recording live. We're recording live in order to get this information out to the public. This is the moment to hear from our law enforcement agencies on this issue.
Juanes Hayes. Juanes Hayes. Say his name.
Juanes Hayes.
He was a son, a brother, a friend. He was a caretaker, an entertainer, and a person, loving and beloved. Listen to his family when they tell you who he was. Listen to his friends. The police and the city want to tell you who Juanes was. criminal, then he fit the description. They cast aspersions on his character in the news, but refused to show his mother the police reports. They refused to release their autopsy reports.
right now.
If they had evidence to back up their claims, have no doubt we would have seen it by now. If they had fingerprints on a replica firearm, if they had dash cam footage that in any way backed up what they want you to believe, it would be public domain. Again and again, we see police departments put the victim of police crime on trial. Police officers almost never go to trial for crimes they perpetrate. In fact, the family of Quantistates have been told by the city of Portland and by the Portland Police Bureau that they should not expect justice, that they should expect to be lied to, that the officers involved will likely not stand trial or face any sort of punishment for their crimes. And then, when the city comes together to mourn a lost child, a militarized police force is sent against the mourners. Who wears riot gear to a memorial? Yeah, right. Who interrupts the mother's mourning?
Thank you.
Mother bullets?
I appreciate what you're here to talk about. We are a social justice institution. Right now, what we're doing is getting out information that you want to hear. This is about the racial and ethnic disparity that is an issue that you are here to learn about. It is important that we get this information out.
If police are not capable of dispensing justice to one of their own, then they are not for the people. Give us the truth. You cannot give Qantas back to his family, but you can give them justice. Yes.
I want to thank you for coming tonight. And we support you. And this is why we're here. This is why we're here. And if we can get the information out, I would appreciate the opportunity.
Black lives matter. 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 Black lives matter.
Thank you. Thank you for having your voices heard, but at this time we'd like to continue. But I appreciate what you're here and what we're here to talk about. So I admit that I lost my place.
The process for the lead on the street.
Yes, thank you.
$800,000 that the county chair put into the lead program. It sounds like a lot of money. It is a lot of money. My assertion is, folks are arrested for that first time possession of a controlled substance, and they go to jail. I don't think that's a proper place to cure addiction. And court costs related to recovery addictions. My assertion is it's a whole lot more than $800,000.